Eloin Maris stood beneath a ceiling of soft gold light, watching the final minutes before the Rowe Foundation Winter Gala opened its doors. The ballroom looked flawless. Cream roses rested in antique silver bowls. Candle flames trembled inside crystal holders. Hand-torn menu cards sat on folded linen with quiet grace. Every table held balance. Every detail carried care. Nothing in the room felt loud. It felt rich, warm, and precise, which was exactly how Eloin wanted it. She moved through the space with calm focus, straightening a ribbon here, lowering a candle flame there, adjusting a chair by less than an inch because her eye caught what others missed. Staff crossed the floor in polished black and white, each one trusting the woman at the center of the room to guide the night without panic. Beyond the tall doors waited donors, cameras, old money, and the polished faces of people who expected beauty as if it arrived on command. But Eloin knew better. Beauty never arrived on command. It arrived through labor, taste, restraint, and long hours no one applauded. Tonight mattered more than most nights. Her name sat quietly on every elegant surface in that ballroom, even if many of the guests would never know it. This was the grandest event of her career, the kind of night that told the world she had entered rooms once closed to women like her and made them glow on her own terms. She looked at the room one last time and let herself feel proud. She did not know the night was already changing. For Eloin, this gala was never only about flowers, light, and polished tables. It was proof that quiet work still had value. Proof that a woman could build something lasting with patience, discipline, and taste. Every candle in that ballroom carried a choice she had made. Every arrangement held hours of care no guest would ever see. The room looked effortless because she had refused to let it look otherwise. That was why her chest felt full as the first wave of guests gathered beyond the doors. Tonight held more than professional success. It held hope. Over the past months, her work had risen. Her name had begun to travel through circles once far above her reach, and somewhere in the middle of that climb, love had found her too. Not loud love, not careless love, something gentler, something that had made her believe she could stand in a room filled with wealth and still be chosen for who she was. Cassian Rowe had become part of that hope. He had a way of looking at her that made the noise around them fall away. He noticed what others missed. He spoke with care. He never made her feel like she needed to perform to be worthy of his attention. In a world where power often came with distance, he had felt steady. And that is why trust is never a small thing. It is not only about being loved. It is about feeling safe enough to place your full heart in someone's hands. What Eloin did not know was this. The man moving through that polished world with quiet control had entered her life carrying a truth he never gave her. Cassian Rowe knew her surname before she ever trusted him. He knew the history tied to it. He knew her family had once paid a painful price because of decisions made inside the world he came from. Long before her heart opened to him, he had already seen the file, the name, and the damage. He had already understood that Eloin Maris was not simply a gifted designer who crossed his path at the right time. She was the daughter of a man his father's circle had helped push aside. Yet he stayed near her. He hired her because her work moved him. He kept finding reasons to bring her into Rowe Meridian spaces, because being close to her felt honest in a way the rest of his world never had. He told himself he would explain once he had repaired enough of the past to make the truth easier to bear. He told himself love would hold once she knew. He told himself he still had time. So while Eloin stood in that ballroom thinking love and success had finally met in one room, Cassian stood under the same light with silence in his hands. That silence is where the danger lived. Not in the gala, not in the wealth, not in the cameras. In the secret, one heart carried, while the other remained open. So, what do you do when the person who feels safest is the one carrying the truth that could wound you most? What hurts more? A man who never loved you at all, or a man who loved you deeply while keeping back the one thing you deserved to know? What breaks trust more? The false comfort of silence, or the moment honesty arrives too late to feel clean? That is the question waiting for Eloin Maris on this glittering night, because in a few moments, she will step away from the ballroom she built with her own hands. She will walk into a quieter corridor lined with memory. She will see a name from her past framed under glass. She will hear voices through a half-open door. She will stand still while the world inside her shifts. And once truth reaches her, nothing in that room will feel the same again. Not the roses, not the candlelight, not the man she thought she knew. Stay close to this story, because this is not only about heartbreak in a room full of wealth. It is about dignity. It is about self-respect. It is about the cost of delayed honesty. Most of all, it is about the moment a woman must decide whether love is enough to hold her or whether peace matters more. Welcome to Romance Tales by Mr. Kingsley, where love meets hard choices, quiet strength, and the kind of lessons that stay with you long after the story ends. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with class, hidden truth, tender romance, and powerful life lessons, subscribe now, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. If you were in Elowen's place, would you stay with a man who loved you deeply but kept a truth this serious from you, or would you walk away and protect your peace? Because tonight, Elowen is about to learn that the grandest room of her career holds more than beauty. It holds memory. It holds history. It holds a truth, waiting in silence. She still believes this gala will mark her rise. She still believes the man she loves is standing beside her with an open heart. She still believes the night will end in pride, not pain. But before the last candle burns low, she will hear words that change the meaning of everything she built, everything she trusted, and everything she thought love was. Now, let us step into the ballroom and begin with the moment beauty still looked whole, right before it broke. Elowen Maris moved through the Rowe Foundation ballroom with the calm precision of a woman who had trained herself to carry beauty without fuss. The doors had not opened yet, but the room already felt alive. Candlelight flickered across crystal stems and silver bowls filled with cream roses. Soft music drifted through the air while staff made their last quiet passes around the tables. Every place card sat at the exact angle she wanted. Every linen fold rested smooth and sharp. Every arrangement held the balance she had sketched, revised, and defended over weeks of work. She paused near the center aisle and let her eyes travel slowly across the room. Tonight had to feel effortless. Not cold, not stiff, not loud. Wealth already knew how to be seen. What she gave a room was warmth. She gave it memory. She gave it grace. That was why people kept calling her back. They did not hire her only to make spaces look expensive. They hired her because she made them feel human. One of the junior assistants hurried toward her and whispered that the east table candles burned a little too high. Elowen crossed the floor at once, adjusted 3 glass sleeves by hand, and softened the flame until the light turned gentler. Junior watched from the entrance with a small nod. That was enough to tell Elowen the team was steady. Then she felt him before she turned. Cassian Rowe stepped out from the side corridor in a dark suit that matched the quiet power he wore so easily. He did not speak at once. His gaze moved over the room, then settled on her with a softness he never showed the public. "You made this place feel like something people will remember," he said. Elowen gave him a small smile. That was the plan. He stepped closer, close enough for his voice to lower. "Tonight matters." She thought he meant the gala. She thought he meant her success. She did not know danger had already entered the room with them. For Elowen, this gala was not simply another assignment, another ballroom, another wealthy room waiting to be softened by flowers and light. It carried a deeper weight. Every polished detail before her stood as proof of a life she had built with patience, discipline, and quiet refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. The guests arriving that evening would see elegance. They would see refinement. They would see a seamless event shaped by taste. What they would not see were the years behind it, the small jobs, the borrowed inventory, the sleepless nights, the invoices balanced by hand, and the long climb from fragile beginnings to this room. That was why her chest felt full as she moved from table to table, not with fear, but with meaning. Her name was not printed across the walls, yet it lived in the room all the same, in the warm candlelight, in the hand-torn paper edged in gold, in the way every arrangement invited closeness instead of distance. She had created all of it without bending herself into someone else's idea of worth. That mattered to her more than applause. Tonight also felt personal in a way she had not fully admitted, even to herself. Over the last months, work had not been the only thing rising in her life. Love had entered quietly, without spectacle, and taken root in places she had long kept guarded. Cassian had become part of the future she had only just begun to trust. With him, success no longer felt lonely. Standing inside the grandest room of her career, Elowen allowed herself to believe something rare and beautiful might be happening. Her work was rising. Her heart was opening. For the first time in a long while, it seemed possible that both could live in the same room without one costing her the other. When the ballroom doors opened, the room changed at once. Soft conversation rolled inward first, followed by the glow of gowns, dark tailored jackets, polished shoes, and the familiar confidence of people used to entering places prepared for them. Glasses caught the light. Quiet laughter rose near the entrance. Donors moved beneath the floral arch, with the slow ease of people who believed the night already belonged to them. Elowen stood just far enough back to watch the flow, her eye moving from one corner of the room to the next, making sure beauty held under pressure. She greeted sponsors with calm warmth, answered last-minute questions from staff, and adjusted small details before anyone else saw them. One server needed a tray route changed to avoid crowding near the central staircase. One candle near the north wall needed replacing because the wick had burned too low. One guest table needed a chair shifted so the arrangement sat in better balance. Elowen handled each issue with light hands and steady breath. No panic, no wasted motion. Across the ballroom, Cassian had stepped fully into his public role. He shook hands, exchanged polished greetings, and accepted praise with the clean ease people expected from a man like him. Yet even while he moved through donors and board members, his attention kept circling back to Elowen. Once, while speaking to an older couple near the foundation display, his eyes found her across the crowd and held there for one brief moment longer than they should have. It was enough for her to feel it. That was when a young volunteer approached, trying to keep her voice low. "Miss Maris, I'm sorry. One of the archival frames in the east corridor has slipped. It looks slightly crooked." Elowen turned at once. It was a small issue, the sort most people would miss, but she would not. "I'll fix it myself," she said. She passed her glass to a server, smoothed her gown once, and stepped away from the warmth of the crowd toward the quieter corridor, unaware that a simple correction was about to open the worst truth of her life. The east corridor felt different from the ballroom. The music reached it only as a softened murmur, and the gold glow from the main hall faded into a calmer wash of light against paneled walls. Elowen had designed this passage to feel like memory. Framed photographs, restored signage, and pieces from old local businesses lined the walls with quiet dignity. Guests were meant to pass through it and remember that beauty did not begin in grand hotels or foundation speeches. It began in the hands of people who worked with care long before wealth arrived to rename everything. She moved toward the frame the volunteer had mentioned, already lifting one hand to straighten it. Her steps slowed before she even reached it. Maris Press. Her father's name stood beneath glass in faded gold lettering, mounted with a care that made her breath catch. For one suspended moment, she saw not a display piece, but the old print label that once sat at the bottom of wedding stationery, museum catalogues, and literary editions in Bram Maris's careful shop. Beneath the frame sat a short card describing it as part of the city's heritage, a business lost during redevelopment years ago. Lost. The word cut deeper than she expected. She stepped closer, her throat tightening, one hand hovering near the edge of the frame as if touching it might bring her father's voice nearer. That was when voices drifted through the half-open library door just beside the display. Celestine spoke first, calm and cold. "You should have told her before bringing her into this room." Elowen froze. Cassian answered in a low voice that carried strain. She had never heard so clearly before. "I was going to—" Celestine did not ease. "You have been saying that for months. She still thinks you met her by chance. She still does not know you recognized the Maris name the first night." Elowen's hand fell from the frame. The corridor stayed still. Inside her, everything began to shift. Elowen did not move, She stayed in the corridor with her face turned toward her father's name, but every part of her was listening now. Cassian spoke first, his voice quieter than before, worn by something heavier than pressure. "I know exactly what she does not know." Celestine answered without pity. "Your father's dealings ruined her family's life. You saw her surname, learned who she was, hired her, fell in love with her, and kept silent. You told yourself truth would hurt less later. It will not." The world inside Eloin seemed to lose sound for a moment, not because the corridor had gone silent, but because her mind could not hold all of it at once. He knew, from the first night, from the first meeting, from the first steady look that made her feel seen. He had known who she was while she stood before him with open trust, unaware that part of her story was already in his hands. Cassian said something more, words about trying to repair old wrongs, words about not wanting pity near what they had built, words about timing and proof, and making things right. Eloin heard them, yet they reached her from a distance. The sharpest truth had already landed. He knew. Her fingers curled slowly against her palm. No tears came, not yet. The hurt was too fresh, too precise. It did not burst. It settled, cold, deep, and impossible to deny. Before either of them could step out and find her standing there, Eloin turned away from the library door. Her steps were steady. Her back remained straight. By the time she crossed into the ballroom again, her expression had smoothed into professional calm. She adjusted one candle, thanked one donor, directed one server to the west aisle. No one noticed the change. Across the room, Cassian lifted his head and found her with his eyes. In that instant, he understood. The night was not over. The real break was still ahead. Long before Eloin Maris learned how to command a ballroom with flowers and candlelight, she learned beauty in a narrower place, a print shop on a quiet Charleston street where old brick held summer heat and paper carried the scent of ink, cotton, and care. The shop sat below the family home, its front windows dressed with sample wedding cards, gilt-edged menus, museum catalogues and bookplates her father had finished by hand. Nothing in it felt rushed. Even the silence had order. Bram Maris worked with the patience of a man who believed every object leaving his hands spoke on his behalf. He straightened stacks before closing. He checked margins twice. He ran his fingers over paper stock as if it deserved respect before it deserved profit. When Eloin was small, she would stand on a stool beside the long work table and watch him line up type, trim thick card, and study color under the light with a seriousness that made ordinary things feel sacred. He never treated work as a chore. He treated it as character made visible. Upstairs, Soraya Maris moved through their home with a softer kind of artistry. She sewed gowns near the window where afternoon light fell strongest and kept silk scraps folded in labeled boxes by shade and texture. Her voice was calm, her steps unhurried, her standards quiet but exact. She did not lecture often. She taught through the way she lived. A table set with care, a hem finished even where no one would look, a room kept warm without waste. She believed grace was not display, it was discipline worn gently. That home shaped Eloin before loss ever touched it. Downstairs, she learned that hands should be honest. Upstairs, she learned that beauty should never beg for attention. Between her father's ink and her mother's silk, she grew inside a world where care, restraint, and integrity belonged together. As Eloin grew, she began to understand that in her parents' world, work was never only work. It carried weight. It said something about the person who made it, the values they kept, and the corners they refused to cut. Bram never used those exact words in long speeches, yet he lived them every day. If a line of print looked uneven, he redid it. If a paper stock felt cheap in the hand, he rejected it. If a client wanted something polished but dishonest, his face would grow quiet in a way Eloin learned to read early. He believed that whatever left his shop should be clean in more than appearance. It should be clean in spirit. That lesson shaped her long before she knew it would save her. Soraya taught the same truth in a softer form. She often told Eloin that a woman should never let comfort cost her self-respect. She did not mean comfort in the simple sense of soft furniture or a full table. She meant the kind of comfort people offered when they wanted to make you smaller in exchange for ease. She meant the temptation to accept what looked secure while knowing it asked you to betray something inside yourself. To Soraya, dignity was quiet. It did not shout across rooms. It stood up, lifted its chin, and walked away when peace came with a price too heavy to pay. So Eloan grew between two kinds of strength. From Bram, she learned that honest work leaves a clean mark. From Soraya, she learned that inner steadiness matters more than appearances. That is why, even as a girl, she carried herself with unusual calm. She listened before speaking. She noticed what others ignored. She learned that beauty meant little without truth beneath it, and that grace had nothing to do with weakness. The first sign of change came dressed in opportunity. A representative connected to a major luxury redevelopment project walked into Bram Maris's shop one bright afternoon carrying folders, polished language, and the kind of confidence that assumed agreement before a word had been signed. The city was changing. Historic properties were being bought, restored, renamed, and sold back to the public as refined progress. The project needed premium printed materials for private investors, launch events, and cultural promotion. It was the sort of contract that could have steadied the Maris family for years. Thick paper, high-volume orders, prestigious names, enough money to ease every quiet pressure that came with running a small, careful business in a city leaning harder toward wealth. At first, Bram took the meeting seriously. He reviewed the paper requests, the event schedules, the press packets, and the formal language they wanted on certain materials. Eloan, still young, watched from the side table while pretending to organize ribbons she had already arranged twice. She saw the way her father's attention sharpened as he turned one page, then another. His expression changed, not into anger, but into stillness. Some of the wording praised the redevelopment, as if it had preserved local history with perfect care. Some lines softened the damage done to smaller family businesses pushed out during the process. Some statements spoke of heritage while hiding the cost paid by the people who had carried that heritage for decades. Bram closed the folder with calm hands. He told the man he could print invitations, catalogues, and event pieces. He would not print language that disguised harm as honor. The man smiled in a thin, careful way and said they were simply offering a good business opportunity. Bram answered that an opportunity was not good if it asked him to place clean ink over a dirty truth. The room stayed polite. The pressure began anyway. At first, nothing happened in a way anyone could point to and name. That was what made it harder to fight. Bram did not receive an open threat. No one raised a voice inside the shop. No letter arrived stating that his refusal would cost him everything. Instead, the damage came through absence. A returning client delayed an order without explanation. A museum contact, who had praised his work for years, suddenly chose another printer. A private event contract that had sounded certain went quiet after weeks of promising conversations. Each loss, on its own, looked small enough to dismiss. Together, they began to gather weight. Eloan noticed it in the details before anyone spoke of it aloud. Her father stayed longer at the work table after closing, pencil in hand, numbers spread before him in a silence that felt different from his usual concentration. Her mother began saving scraps she once would have replaced without thought. Evening meals grew simpler. The warmth of the home remained, but a new caution moved through it, soft and constant. Then came the financial shift. A loan Bram had managed carefully for years was transferred to another holder. The terms changed. The patience vanished. Deadlines tightened. What had once felt manageable now pressed against the family with cold efficiency. Bram made calls. He requested time. He offered partial payments and honest explanations. He was treated with polite distance, as if the years of good work behind his name no longer mattered. The hardest blow came with the lease. The building that held the shop and the home above it was no longer secure. Renewal, once expected, was suddenly uncertain. Papers moved. Conversations stalled. Prices rose beyond reason. Bram stood at the counter one evening with the notice in his hand while Soraya read it twice in silence. For the first time, the cost of honesty stood fully inside the room. Not as a principle, not as a warning, as a real threat to the life they had built. Bram Maris never became a loud man after the losses began. That was part of what made the change in him so painful to witness. He still rose early. He still straightened the work table before sitting down. He still spoke gently to clients who remained. Yet something in his light grew quieter. The energy that once moved through his hands with such calm certainty now seemed harder for him to reach. He carried himself with dignity, but Elowen could see the strain in the pauses between tasks, in the way he sat a little longer before standing, in the silence that followed each envelope he opened. Soraya saw it too, though she never let fear rule the house. She kept order where she could. She folded fabric. She mended what still had use. She lit the table with warmth, even when money had grown tight. One evening, after Elowen found her father alone in the shop staring at old sample books he could no longer afford to reprint, Soraya brought her upstairs and spoke with unusual firmness. "Listen to me," she said. "Life will offer comfort in forms that ask too much from you. Never take peace from a hand that first asks you to betray yourself. A full room means nothing if you cannot stand straight inside it." Elowen never forgot those words. Not long after, Bram's strength began to fail in ways the family could no longer brush aside. The illness was quiet, much like the man himself. It did not come with spectacle. It came with fatigue, slower steps, and days when even speaking seemed to cost him more than he wanted his wife and daughter to know. When he passed, the grief inside the home was deep and clean, without noise, without performance. Elowen wept. Then she worked. She did not choose work because she felt no pain. She chose it because collapse would not honor the hands that raised her. When Bram was gone, and the print shop was no longer theirs, Elowen Maris did not step into a ready-made future. She stepped into empty space. There was no wealthy backer waiting to lift her, no grand studio with polished shelves and fresh inventory, no neat rescue wrapped in sympathy. What she had was her mother's steadiness, her father's standard for honest work, and a pair of hands that had learned early how to make small things feel beautiful. She began wherever a door opened. A garden brunch for a retired teacher with 12 guests and a borrowed tea set. A modest engagement dinner in a courtyard where she had to string lights herself because the host had forgotten to hire help. A church book launch with folded linens she pressed at midnight on her mother's dining table. In those days, every job asked for more than she could comfortably give, yet she kept saying yes, then figuring it out with care. Her tools did not arrive in matching boxes. She borrowed candle stands from one neighbor, glass vases from another, and old serving trays from a family friend who ran a small cafe. She hand-painted signs when printing costs sat beyond reach. She stitched runners from leftover fabric Soraya saved in neat stacks. She carried chairs in the back of borrowed cars, pinned flowers by hand, and cleaned up her own events long after guests had gone home. Those early nights were long. Charleston would go quiet outside while Elowen stayed awake under a single lamp, sketching layouts on scrap paper, counting stems, rewriting small budgets, and teaching herself how to stretch little into enough. Nothing about her beginning looked glamorous. That was why it mattered. Her rise did not start with luck, attention, or sudden favor. It started with labor, restraint, and a stubborn refusal to let loss decide the shape of her life. Elowen never spoke about hardship as if it made her special. She carried it the way her parents had carried everything that mattered, with steadiness, order, and quiet pride. She did not tell clients how little she had when she started. She did not ask people to admire her struggle. She simply kept showing up with clean ideas, careful hands, and work that felt far richer than the size of her budget. That quiet discipline shaped every part of her early rise. When a client changed colors at the last minute, Elowen did not panic. She went back to the market at dawn, chose new blooms with a sharper eye, and rebuilt the arrangement plan before noon. When a dinner host cut the budget halfway through planning, she did not offer something careless and call it enough. She reworked the table design, removed what felt excessive, and kept only what carried warmth. When deliveries arrived late, she adjusted the flow of the room so nothing looked missing. Every challenge taught her the same lesson. Beauty does not come from abundance first. It comes from judgment. That was why people began to trust her. Guests who attended one of her small events would later speak about how comfortable the room felt, how thoughtful the details were, how nothing seemed forced. They often could not explain why they remembered her work so clearly. The answer was simple. Elowen built spaces with emotional truth. She listened to the people involved. She noticed family tension. She noticed grief beneath celebration. She noticed when a host wanted elegance, but also safety, intimacy, and ease. Then she designed around what people felt, not only what they said. Slowly, without noise, her name began to move from one careful recommendation to the next. Not because she chased attention, but because every room she touched felt earned. Elowen learned her craft through movement, mistakes, and repeated practice, never through a polished classroom or a tidy path. She studied flowers at the market by touch and patience, asking which stems held longest, which blooms opened too fast, which greens gave softness without making an arrangement feel heavy. She learned tablescapes by building them in real rooms with real limits, narrow dining spaces, uneven light, missing linens, late deliveries, anxious hosts. Over time, she understood that an event did not begin when guests arrived. It began with flow, how a person entered a room, where their eye landed first, where conversation felt easy, where silence could rest without feeling empty. That instinct sharpened with every job. She learned that candlelight could soften tension at a family dinner. She learned that flowers placed too high made people feel separated, while lower arrangements invited warmth. She learned that a room could look expensive and still feel cold, and that true elegance came from balance, not excess. She sketched constantly, not to impress anyone, but to train her eye until beauty became second nature. Junior Vale entered her life during one of those exhausting early seasons. She arrived first as extra help for a weekend anniversary dinner, recommended by a caterer who said she was quick, reliable, and impossible to rattle. That description turned out to be true. Junior could carry crates, calm nervous vendors, catch mistakes before they spread, and still laugh while doing it. More than that, she understood Elowen's standards without needing long explanations. Within months, she became far more than occasional help. She became Elowen's anchor. She managed schedules, tracked supplies, handled last-minute calls, and guarded the order behind every event. Together, they turned scattered effort into structure. The work no longer lived in boxes and borrowed corners alone. A real studio, small but steady, had begun to take shape. By the time Maris House Atelier had a name painted on the door of a small rented workspace, people in Charleston had started to speak about Elowen Maris with a kind of quiet certainty. She was not the cheapest option, though she often worked within modest budgets. She was not the loudest name either. She did not chase attention, post herself into every room, or turn every event into a performance. Yet her work stayed in people's minds. Hosts spoke of how calm they felt once she took over. Guests remembered the warmth of her tables, the softness of her lighting, the way even a formal dinner seemed to invite real conversation. That was what set her apart. Elowen did not decorate rooms to impress strangers. She shaped them to feel honest to the people inside them. If a family carried old tension, she softened the space so no one felt trapped. If a widow hosted her first gathering after loss, Elowen built quiet grace into every detail without turning sorrow into a show. If a young couple wanted elegance but feared looking foolish beside wealthier friends, she gave them beauty that felt secure, not strained. Her gift was not simply arranging flowers or placing candles. Her gift was reading emotional temperature and answering it with care. Clients began to return, then recommend her to others. A private dinner led to a literary salon. A literary salon led to a proposal weekend. A proposal weekend led to a historic home dinner hosted by a family name people noticed. With each event, her reach stretched a little farther. Junior saw it before Elowen admitted it. "You know, this is growing beyond small rooms now," she said one evening while reviewing bookings. Elowen looked down at the calendar, full enough to make her chest tighten. She had built something real. The question was no longer whether people believed in her work. The question was, how far that work was about to carry her. The call came on a quiet afternoon when Eloin was reviewing linen samples at the work table, and Junior was sorting invoices beside the window. At first, it sounded like the kind of inquiry they had learned to take calmly. A formal event, a heritage venue, a client who wanted refinement without stiffness. But, as the details unfolded, the room around Eloin seemed to sharpen. The Charleston Preservation Circle was hosting its annual fundraiser inside one of the city's most admired historic properties. The guest list would include donors, cultural patrons, business leaders, and people whose names carried real influence in spaces Eloin had only begun to enter. They had seen her work at a private literary dinner and wanted her to lead the event design. For a moment, she simply held the phone and listened. This was larger than anything Maris House Atelier had handled before. Larger in scale, larger in scrutiny, and larger in what it could change. The budget was bigger. The expectations were higher. The room itself carried history. Nothing about it allowed carelessness. When Eloin finally ended the call, Junior took one look at her face and stood up. "That big?" she asked. Eloin nodded once, still processing it. That night, long after the studio closed, she returned to the venue notes and floor sketches with the kind of focus that felt almost sacred. She knew this job could open a new chapter for her business. More than that, it felt aligned with everything she valued: preservation, memory, beauty, and the respectful handling of places shaped by time. When the event day came, Eloin entered the old property before dawn, moving through stone halls and tall windows washed with early light. She was checking final floral placement near the entrance when she felt a presence pause behind her. She turned. Cassian Rowe stood a few steps away, watching the room first, then her. He had not entered her story through romance. He entered it through her work. Cassian Rowe's world looked nothing like the one Eloin Maris had built from borrowed candle stands and hand-pressed linens. At Rowe Meridian, everything carried scale. Glass walls, polished stone, private boardrooms lined with framed architectural drawings, assistants who moved with trained efficiency, schedules timed down to the minute, public statements revised until every word served a purpose. The company restored historic buildings and turned them into elite hotels, private estates, and cultural landmarks for the kind of people who liked legacy best when it came with controlled lighting and excellent wine. Cassian stood at the center of all of it, as if he had been designed for that world. He was tall, restrained, and exact. His suits were always sharp, his voice measured, his public image nearly impossible to fault. Investors trusted him. Journalists described him as disciplined. Board members admired his clarity. He did not waste words, and he never let emotion wander into places where business had to stay clean. To most people, he looked untouchable, the kind of man who had learned early that control was not only useful but necessary. Yet private control is not the same as peace. Behind the polished surface, Cassian carried a history he rarely allowed himself to name for long. His late father had built part of the Rowe fortune through deals celebrated in public and softened in private. On paper, the records looked legal, efficient, and forward-looking. In reality, some of those victories had been won through pressure placed on smaller names with less power to resist. Cassian had inherited the empire, but he had also inherited the quiet stain buried beneath its shine. That was the truth. No magazine profile ever printed. The world saw a man made of certainty. Only Cassian knew how much of that certainty had been built over shame. Cassian did not find the truth about Bram Maris in one dramatic moment. It reached him through paperwork, audit reviews, and archived correspondence he began studying after taking deeper control of Rowe Meridian's legacy holdings. At first, he had approached those files with the cool discipline he brought to every part of the company. He wanted clarity, not sentiment. He wanted to understand which older deals still carried legal exposure, financial weakness, or public risk. What he did not expect was the moral weight waiting in the quiet pages of past transactions. The Maris file caught his attention because it looked small. A boutique print house, a property consolidation zone, a transferred loan, a lease failure, public language around redevelopment that praised preservation, while pushing aside the very people who had given those streets their character. None of it was illegal in the narrow sense. That was what made it worse. It had been done neatly, signed properly, defended with polished words. The kind of harm powerful people often preferred because it could be explained away. Cassian read every page. He saw where pressure had been applied. He saw how his father's circle had moved around resistance instead of through it. He saw how a man named Bram Maris had refused to print promotional language that softened what the project was costing smaller families. He saw what followed. Business lost. Debt shifted. Lease gone. Life narrowed. The shame of it did not strike Cassian as rage. It sat lower and deeper. He felt it in the stillness that followed when he closed the file and kept his hand resting on it longer than necessary. His father was gone. No apology could be pulled from him now. Yet the damage remained, and the Rowe name still sat on the structure that had benefited from it. From that day forward, Cassian carried the knowledge like a mark beneath his carefully managed composure. To everyone around him, he remained controlled. Inside, he knew his inheritance was not only wealth, it was guilt with a signature. After reading the Maris file, Cassian could not return to business as usual, even if that was what everyone around him expected. He began reviewing older holdings with a sharper eye, tracing patterns hidden beneath respectable language and polished summaries. Quietly, without public speeches, he started correcting what he could. A lease dispute in one district was settled more fairly. A family-owned supplier pushed aside in an earlier restructuring was brought back into consideration. A small cultural property, once treated like a decorative asset, was restored with care instead of stripped for prestige. None of it felt large enough. None of it erased what had already been taken. Still, it was the only place he knew to begin. He told no one the full reason for the change. To the board, his decisions looked like a more thoughtful version of leadership. To the press, they looked like modern stewardship. To Cassian, they were attempts, imperfect and incomplete, to place some measure of conscience inside an empire that had too often mistaken power for righteousness. Then came the Charleston Preservation Fundraiser. Cassian attended because Rowe Meridian supported the event, and because he had a habit of observing heritage spaces personally whenever the company's name sat near them. He expected old walls, careful speeches, and the familiar language of donors congratulating one another for caring about history. What he did not expect was to enter the room and stop. The event did not feel staged. It felt held. Candlelight softened the stone. Floral work added warmth without excess. The tables invited closeness rather than display. Someone had designed the room with restraint, memory, and unusual emotional intelligence. Cassian noticed it at once. Then he noticed the woman directing it. Eloin Maris stood near the entrance, adjusting the line of a floral arrangement with calm precision. A moment later, he saw the event card. Maris. The name struck harder than the room itself. For a brief moment, Cassian said nothing. He stood with the event card in his hand and looked across the room at Eloin Maris, as if the distance between them had suddenly filled with years he had not expected to meet in human form. He had read the name in a file. He had seen it buried in transaction records, loan transfers, and redevelopment notes written in polished language that concealed moral damage. Now that name stood before him in a woman with calm eyes, steady hands, and a presence that made the room feel more truthful than the people funding it. He knew exactly who she was. Not in the shallow way strangers know one another by introduction or reputation. He knew she was Bram Maris's daughter. He knew the shop her father had lost. He knew the pressure that had closed around that family. He knew that part of the comfort and power surrounding his own life had been built in a world that had made theirs smaller. Every instinct that still answered to conscience told him to leave her untouched. He should have walked across the room, thanked the organizers, and kept his distance. He should have let her talent remain separate from the stain attached to his name. More than that, he should have stayed away until he could speak the truth plainly, with nothing softened, hidden, or delayed. Anything less would be unfair. He knew it even then. But knowing the right thing and choosing it are not the same act. Because even before he spoke to her, something about Eloin unsettled him in a way boardrooms never could. She moved with a calm he had spent years trying to imitate in harder forms. Her work carried integrity. Her presence held no performance. And suddenly, the question standing before him was not only moral, it was personal. If he stepped toward her, silence would step with him. Cassian stepped toward Eloin anyway. Their first exchange was simple, professional, clean. He asked who had designed the room, though he already knew the answer from the event card in his hand. She turned, met his gaze, and told him with calm courtesy that the event was hers. Maris House Atelier. The name settled over him with a weight he kept hidden behind his usual composure. He told himself the next choice was about work. That was the explanation he reached for because it sounded respectable, even to his own mind. Eloin's talent was undeniable. The room proved it. She had taken a historic space and given it warmth without stripping it of dignity. She understood restraint. She understood memory. She understood how beauty should feel lived in, not displayed from a distance. Roe Meridian restored spaces for a living, yet too few people within his world understood how to make those spaces human. Eloin did. So he asked careful questions about her process. She answered with the same thoughtful precision that shaped her work. She spoke of atmosphere, emotional balance, and the duty of a room to make people feel at ease, not merely impressed. The more she spoke, the more dangerous the moment became, because admiration was no longer abstract. It had a face, a voice, and a surname he had no right to ignore. Before the fundraiser ended, Cassian told one of his senior staff to reach out about an upcoming private dinner at a restored Roe property. He presented the decision as business. Talent deserved opportunity. Quality deserved scale. It was true. It was not whole, because when he left that night, he knew he had done more than hire a gifted designer. He had stepped into the life of Bram Maris's daughter while carrying a truth she did not know. That was how love began, not in honesty, in silence. The first real conversation between Eloin Maris and Cassian Roe did not happen in the center of a ballroom, where polished people traded compliments beneath warm light. It happened near a half-open service door after the Charleston Preservation fundraiser had settled into its own rhythm. Outside, rain tapped softly against the old stone courtyard, turning the night cooler and quieter. Inside, the event moved on without them, full of donors, speeches, and practiced smiles. In that narrow space between public elegance and private stillness, something far more important began. Eloin had stepped away to check on a delayed delivery of dessert plates. She found the issue handled before she arrived, yet she lingered for a second near the service corridor, letting herself breathe after hours of measured control. When she turned, Cassian was there, not close enough to crowd her, only near enough to make the space feel different. His jacket was still perfectly cut, his expression calm as ever, but there was less distance in him than before. "You made an old room feel kind," he said. The line caught her off guard. People usually praised beauty, taste, or elegance. Very few spoke about kindness in relation to a room. Eloin folded her hands lightly before her. Most people know how to make a room look expensive. That part is easy if money is around. What matters more is whether people can breathe in it. Cassian glanced toward the ballroom. A lot of beautiful rooms feel cold. She held his gaze a moment longer. Then, they were designed for display, not for people. Rain tapped again beyond the half-open door, soft and steady. He looked back at her with a stillness that made the world behind them feel far away. "Rooms should feel safe," he said quietly, "not only impressive." That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough for Eloin to look at him differently. After the fundraiser, Roe Meridian reached out exactly as promised. The first assignment was a private dinner inside one of the company's restored Charleston properties, a smaller event than the fundraiser but one with a guest list that mattered. Eloin accepted with calm professionalism, though Junior saw at once that the job meant more than a booking. It was not only the scale, it was him. Still, nothing between Eloin and Cassian moved too fast. Their closeness did not begin with grand declarations or obvious pursuit. It built through repeated meetings, shared focus, and the small human moments that reveal character more honestly than charm ever can. Eloin noticed first how gently he moved through his own world. He thanked servers by name. He never spoke sharply to staff, even when changes came late. He listened all the way through an explanation before offering direction. In rooms where wealth often made people careless, his restraint stood out. Cassian, in turn, saw what discipline looked like when it wore no need for praise. Eloin arrived prepared. She checked every list herself. She noticed flaws before others named them. She paid assistants before paying herself whenever a budget tightened. If a table felt crowded, she fixed it. If a color looked wrong in evening light, she changed it. She never used chaos as proof of effort. She believed work should hold. That mutual attention began to shape trust. There were small moments. A tray nearly slipped during setup, and Cassian steadied it before the glasses shattered. Eloin thanked him, expecting him to pass the moment off casually, but he stayed to help rearrange the settings until the table looked right again. On another evening, he found her reviewing floral samples after everyone else had left, and brought her tea without asking whether she wanted it. He simply remembered what she had once chosen at a meeting. None of it looked dramatic from the outside. That was why it mattered. Trust rarely begins in spectacle. It begins in repeated evidence that a person is careful with what touches your life. Savannah gave them their first easy laughter. The dinner was set on a rooftop terrace above the river, where lanterns hung from iron hooks and the evening air carried a soft coastal breeze. Eloin had chosen pale florals, low candlelight, and handwritten place cards weighted with polished stones so nothing would disturb the balance of the tables. For most of the setup, the weather held. Then, just as twilight settled over the city, a stronger gust rushed across the terrace and lifted 3 place cards into the air. Eloin reached for one and missed. Cassian caught another against his sleeve. A third skidded under a chair near the railing. For one bright, unguarded minute, the two of them were no longer the event designer and the controlled hotel air. They were simply a man and a woman chasing paper through warm evening light, laughing before either of them meant to. When Eloin finally caught the last card, she turned with a smile still on her face. Her hair had loosened in the wind. One strand had fallen across her cheek. Cassian stepped closer and tucked it gently behind her ear, his hand careful, his gaze steady. The touch lasted only a second, yet it changed the air between them. Eloin felt it long after he stepped back. New Orleans deepened what Savannah began. After another client dinner, the courtyard outside the venue held the fading remains of live music, a few floating notes, and a softness the city seemed to guard for people willing to notice it. Cassian held out his hand without performance. Eloin looked at it, then at him, and placed her hand in his. Their dance was small and quiet. No audience, no display, just closeness, warmth, and a growing tenderness. Neither of them could hide much longer. If this story is pulling you in, like this video and tell me below, what moment first made you feel Eloin was starting to fall for him? Their first kiss came on a night that should have ended in frustration. The venue was an old conservatory space outside Charleston, hired for a private engagement dinner with too much glass, too much heat trapped from the day, and a floral delivery that arrived later than promised. By the time the final arrangements were carried in, several blooms had already begun to soften at the edges. What should have looked fresh and light now looked tired under the evening lamps. Eloin saw it at once. She did not raise her voice. She never did. She simply rolled up her sleeves, asked Junior to redirect the team, and began pulling apart what had taken hours to build. Vases were emptied. Greens were replaced. The strongest blooms were moved forward. Fragile stems were cut away. While guests gathered in distant rooms, Eloin stood inside the service area with petals caught against her dress and tension held tightly behind her calm expression. By the time the last table was corrected, the staff had dispersed to their stations. Junior had gone to handle a catering issue. The room finally settled into silence. Cassian found Eloin alone near the preparation table, one hand braced against the edge, the other lifting to press tired fingers against her brow. Without speaking, he set a glass of water beside her. She looked up. There was no polished distance in his face now, only concern and a kind of quiet admiration that felt more intimate than praise. "You never leave anything half-loved," he said. The line reached her more deeply than he knew. It carried respect, tenderness, and the simple fact that he had been paying attention to who she was, not only what she did. Eloin held his gaze. The air between them tightened, warm and still. This time, she stepped closer first. Her kiss was soft, searching, and honest. When he kissed her back, the question changed. Not whether love had begun, whether it could survive what still remained hidden. After that first kiss, nothing between Eloin and Cassian turned reckless. If anything, they became more careful with each other, not less. The change showed in quieter ways. A look held a little longer across a room, a hand resting at the small of her back as they moved through a crowded hallway, a late call after an event, not to discuss logistics, but to ask whether she had eaten, whether she was home, whether the night had left her too tired to sleep. Their bond deepened through work, travel, and the kind of stillness that reveals whether two people are truly at ease together. In Charleston, they sat in empty ballrooms after staff had gone home and spoke about buildings, memory, and the strange ache of watching old things survive change. In Savannah, they shared coffee before sunrise while waiting for a florist delivery, the city still soft and grey around them. In New Orleans, they walked hotel courtyards after midnight, saying little, yet feeling no need to fill the silence. That was what surprised Eloin most. With Cassian, silence did not press on her. It rested. She began to feel safe near him in ways she had not expected. Safe enough to laugh without guarding herself. Safe enough to speak about her father without turning every memory into a wound. Safe enough to imagine that love might not demand shrinking, proving, or begging. Cassian, in turn, found something near her that his own world rarely gave him. Peace. Not the polished version people performed at expensive tables, but the real kind. The kind that made him breathe more slowly and think less about control. By the time winter approached, love no longer felt like a possibility standing at the edge of their lives. It had settled between them, warm, steady, deep, and beneath all of it, the secret remained buried. Love did not break all at once. Before the gala, before the corridor, before the words that would split the night in two, it began to strain in smaller ways. One evening, Eloin and Cassian were reviewing paper samples for a winter event inside one of Rome Meridian's restored properties. The ballroom had emptied hours earlier, leaving only the two of them, a spread of textured cards across the table, and the low hush of staff clearing the last glasses in the distance. Eloin stood beneath a pool of warm light, sorting through ivory, pearl, and soft cream stock with the same focus she gave everything that mattered. Cassian watched her from the other side of the table, one sleeve rolled back, his tie loosened just enough to make him look less guarded than usual. She lifted one card and smiled faintly. "My father would have loved this weight," she said. "He used to say paper tells the truth before words do." The sentence was simple, gentle, ordinary, yet it changed the room. Cassian's hand stopped over the sample book, not dramatically, not enough for anyone who did not know how to read silence. But Eloin knew silence. She had grown up around careful people. She felt it at once, that one suspended breath where something inside him seemed to lock. She looked up. His expression had not fully changed, yet the stillness in it had sharpened. It lasted only a moment before he lowered his eyes to the table and asked, almost too casually, "Did he teach you all of this?" The question itself was harmless. The pause before it was not. Eloin answered, but something inside her had already taken note. The mood never fully recovered. They finished the meeting, spoke softly, even shared a late cup of tea before leaving, yet the warmth between them carried a new edge. Nothing had been said. Still, for the first time, Eloin felt the shape of a door inside him that remained closed. Junior Vale did not need a confession to sense when something in a room had gone unfinished. She had worked beside Eloin long enough to notice changes most people missed. The way a conversation ended too neatly, the way a glance lingered after a harmless question, the way a person answered truthfully without answering fully. At first, she kept those instincts to herself. Cassian was attentive, useful, and unlike the careless men who often move through wealthy spaces as if everyone else were background. He treated Eloin with visible respect. He listened. He remembered details. He made room for her work instead of trying to stand over it. On the surface, There was little to fault. Still, Junior kept noticing small things that did not sit right. One afternoon, while reviewing vendor lists in the studio, she asked how Ro Meridian had first found Maris House Atelier. It was an ordinary question, light in tone, almost casual. Cassian, who had stopped by to confirm timing for a private dinner, answered smoothly. He said he had seen Eloin's Charleston work, admired her restraint, and trusted her eye. Every word sounded reasonable, every word was true. Yet when he finished, Junior looked at him a second longer than politeness required. It was not what he said. It was what seemed missing around it. Later that evening, after he left, Junior stood by the studio shelves folding ribbon back into boxes while Eloin reviewed sketches. He answers like a man who edits himself, Junior said. Eloin glanced up. That sounds dramatic. No, Junior replied quietly. It sounds careful. The unease did not arrive as fear. It arrived as weight, a subtle pressure beneath good moments, a feeling that something important stood just outside the light, close enough to affect the room even when no one named it. And once that feeling entered, it became harder for Eloin to ignore. Celestine Rowe never gave Eloin the kind of rejection people could easily point to and condemn. She was too refined for open cruelty, too practiced to leave marks anyone else would notice. Her method was quieter. Invitations arrived late enough to feel accidental, yet often enough to form a pattern. Seating arrangements placed Eloin near the edge of important tables rather than at their center. At gallery dinners and foundation receptions, photographers were suddenly told to take family-only portraits just before Eloin stepped into the frame. Nothing looked dramatic on its own. Together, the message grew impossible to miss. You may enter the room. You do not belong to it. Talia Wren made that message easier to deliver without a single harsh word. She was polished, socially fluent, and perfectly at ease inside the Rowe orbit. She knew which names mattered, which charities impressed the right people, which silences at a dinner table meant approval rather than discomfort. The press had linked her to Cassian often enough that many people already treated her as the version of his future that made sense. Celestine never had to state her preference directly. She only had to praise Talia with careful timing, her poise, her family background, her ease in public spaces, her understanding of what a Rowe life required. Eloin heard those praises and said little. She was too grounded to compete for approval she had never asked for, yet the pressure settled around her all the same. At one dinner she watched Talia and Celestine move through a group of donors with effortless familiarity, while she stood a few feet away speaking to a curator about linens and floral preservation. No one excluded her outright. Even so, she felt the shape of the distance. Cassian noticed some of it, and shifted toward her when he could. But noticing was not the same as naming, and Eloin was beginning to feel the cost of standing inside a world that welcomed her work more easily than it welcomed her. Cassian saw more than Eloin realized. He noticed when Celestine let a pause sit too long before greeting her. He noticed when a place card shifted Eloin farther from the center of a donor table. He noticed when Talia was drawn forward for photographs at the exact moment Eloin should have been standing beside him. Each time, he corrected what he could without turning the room into a scene. A seat changed. A guest list was adjusted. An event brief suddenly placed Maris House Atelier at the center of a major design contract, instead of on the edges of support work. His protections were real. They were also incomplete, because while he was moving pieces around her, he was still hiding the one truth that explained why his nearness had always been dangerous. In private, his guilt kept growing teeth. One afternoon, long after a board meeting had emptied, Cassian sat in his office with a property file open before him. The narrow brick building on the page stood in the old district, once tied to the world Bram Maris had worked in, one of the last small structures still reachable through a tangled chain of ownership and stalled negotiations. Cassian had spent months tracing records, cleaning titles, and purchasing back properties his father's circle had once helped strip from smaller hands. This one mattered more than most, not because it would erase anything, nothing could, but because it touched the same ground where harm had first settled into the Maris name. He bought it quietly. He told himself he was preparing restoration. He told himself he would place something solid in Elowen's hands before asking her to face the truth. A deed, a recovered space, a fact she could see and hold. Yet the deeper question would not leave him. What is repair worth if it arrives before honesty? He had answers for investors, lawyers, and board members. For this, he had none. By the time winter settled over Charleston, Cassian had convinced himself that timing was the difference between harm and care. He was not ignoring the truth. That was the story, he told himself. He was preparing it. He wanted facts in order, deeds secured, records reviewed, and repairs already in motion before Elowen ever heard his confession. He wanted to stand before her with something stronger than regret, something tangible, something that proved he had not only inherited guilt, but chosen responsibility. In his mind, that mattered. He believed truth would land differently if it came with restored property, corrected paperwork, and evidence that he had been trying to make old wrongs less permanent. But care shaped by fear is still delay. The more he planned, the more he postponed. Each week gave him a new reason. One more legal review, one more meeting, one more file to settle before he spoke. He told himself he did not want pity mixed into their love. He told himself he wanted to come to her cleanly. What he failed to understand was that honesty does not become gentler simply because it arrives dressed in preparation. Elowen felt the distance without yet knowing its cause. Cassian remained attentive, present, even tender, yet some part of him seemed to be measuring time against a private deadline she could not see. It showed in moments when his gaze lingered too long after she spoke of her father, in pauses that appeared and disappeared too quickly to question directly, in the quiet heaviness that sometimes settled over him after the happiest evenings. Then came the announcement. The Rowe Foundation Winter Gala would honor preservation, literacy, and heritage crafts in the grandest space Rowe Meridian had restored that season. It would be one of the most visible nights of the year, filled with donors, press, and the very history Cassian had been trying to put back into rightful light. He asked Elowen to design it, and in his heart he decided that night would be the turning point. He would tell her he simply waited too long. The east corridor felt far away from the glitter of the ballroom, though it sat only a short walk from the music, the speeches, and the polished laughter of the guests. Elowen stepped into it with the quiet focus of a woman solving one small problem before it could disturb a larger night. She still held the calm rhythm of work in her body. One frame had shifted, one line needed straightening, one detail wanted her hand. That was all she expected to find, but the corridor did not greet her like a workspace. It greeted her like memory. She had designed this passage with intention. She wanted guests to move through it and feel the dignity of the city's older craft traditions. Framed signs, restored paper labels, faded photographs, and small notes of history lined the walls beneath soft light. The atmosphere carried less performance than the ballroom. It felt quieter, more personal, more honest. A place for heritage, a place for names that once mattered before wealth learned how to repackage them. She walked toward the frame the volunteer mentioned, already lifting her hand to adjust it. Her steps slowed before she reached it. Maris Press. Her father's name stood beneath glass in faded gold letters, mounted with such care that her breath caught before she could stop it. For one suspended second, the years between Charleston and this corridor folded into each other. She was no longer a poised designer in silk on the biggest night of her career. She was a daughter standing in her father's shop again, smelling paper and ink, watching Bram Maris line up cards with patient hands and quiet pride. Beneath the frame, a small printed note described the business as part of the city's cultural heritage, a respected print house lost during redevelopment years ago. Lost. The word sat there in neat type, polished and distant, as if a life could be reduced to a clean line on a display card. Elowen stared at it, her throat tightening. Lost did not tell the truth. Lost sounded passive, gentle, almost accidental. It did not speak of pressure, refusal, sacrifice, or the slow closing of doors. Her fingers hovered near the edge of the frame, but she did not touch it. In that moment, the display stopped being decoration. It stopped being history presented for donor approval. It became a doorway. Through it came her father's voice, her mother's lessons, the narrow stairway above the print shop, the dignity of a life built by careful hands. And through that same doorway, though she did not know it yet, the truth waiting behind the half-open library door was already moving toward her. At first, Elowen did not understand what she was hearing. She only knew that the voice behind the half-open library door belonged to Celestine Rowe, and that the tone in it had none of the polished civility she used in public. It was colder here, stripped of social softness. You should have told her before bringing her into this room. Elowen froze where she stood. The corridor seemed to narrow around her. The frame with her father's name still stood before her. But her attention had shifted completely. For one brief second, she considered walking away. She did not owe curiosity to anyone, yet something in Celestine's words held her still, the way a sudden chill keeps a hand from releasing the doorknob. Then Cassian answered, "I was going to—" His voice was lower than usual, tight in a way she had never heard from him before. No public ease, no practiced calm, only strain. Celestine did not soften. "You have been saying that for months." Months. The word landed first, before the meaning behind it fully formed. Elowen's breathing changed. She did not step closer, but every part of her listened now with painful clarity. "She still thinks you met her by chance," Celestine said. "She still does not know you recognized the Maris name the first night." The floor beneath Elowen did not move, yet it felt as though something inside her had lost balance. Her fingers slipped from the edge of the frame. For a moment, she thought she must have misunderstood. There had to be another meaning, another explanation, another reason the man she loved, the man who had looked at her with such care, would be standing inside a room admitting he had known more than he ever said. Cassian spoke again, quieter this time. "I know exactly what she does not know." That was the moment late honesty revealed its true cruelty. Not in shouting, not in public humiliation, not in a dramatic confession offered too soon to be real. It arrived through two calm voices behind a door, while Elowen stood alone with her father's name under glass, and realized that the love she had trusted had never been entered with equal knowledge. Cassian had known who she was. He had known what touched her family. He had known the history carried inside her surname, while she offered him her heart without defense. The hurt did not strike like noise. It settled like cold. Elowen stepped away from the library door before either of them could open it and find her standing there. Her body moved on instinct, guided by the same discipline that had carried her through every difficult room of her life. One step, then another. Her breathing stayed measured, though nothing inside her felt steady. By the time she reached the ballroom entrance again, her face had already arranged itself into composure. The gala still glowed. Music floated beneath the chandeliers. Donors lifted crystal glasses and praised the room. Conversations moved in elegant circles. The cream roses still held their shape. Candlelight still trembled against silver. Nothing in the ballroom reflected what had just happened in the corridor. That was the strange cruelty of it. Beauty remained untouched, while trust had already split open. Elowen crossed back into the room as if she had only gone to correct a frame and returned satisfied with the result. She adjusted a candle near the west wall. She thanked a patron for admiring the archival display. She signaled one server to shift direction before a tray blocked the central aisle. Her voice stayed calm. Her hands did not shake. Even Junior, watching from across the room, only sensed that something had changed without yet knowing how deep the wound went. That restraint made the hurt sharper. Elowen was not performing strength for the guests. She was protecting her work. Her team had spent weeks building this night around her vision. Their hands were in the flowers, the linens, the lighting, the carefully timed rhythm of the room. She would not let the private failure of one man turn all of that labor into spectacle. The guests would not witness her breaking beside the very arrangements she had created. They would finish their dinners beneath beauty she had built, unaware that the woman guiding it had just learned her love had started under silence. Across the ballroom, Cassian turned from a cluster of board members and found her. The moment his eyes met hers, something in his expression changed. It was small, but she saw it. The stillness, the understanding. He knew she had heard enough. He knew time had run out. Yet even then, he could not cross the room at once. Cameras stood nearby. Donors waited for his speech. Appearances still demanded their place. Eloin held his gaze for one brief, cutting second, then looked away. That was the first answer she gave him. Not forgiveness, not collapse, distance. Cassian found her near the terrace, just after his speech. The ballroom behind them remained full of polished applause, soft music, and the low hum of people who believed the night had gone beautifully. Beyond the glass doors, the terrace offered colder air and a little privacy, though not enough to make the moment gentle. Eloin stood near the stone railing with one hand resting lightly against it, her posture straight, her face calm in a way that told Cassian this would not be solved by tenderness alone. He stopped a few steps away. Eloin. She lifted one hand, not sharply, only firmly enough to keep him where he was. That small motion cut deeper than anger would have. "You knew," she said. There was no room left for evasion. No softened version of the truth could survive in her voice. Cassian's face lost the last of its public polish. Yes, her eyes did not leave his. "You knew who I was when you hired me. Yes, you knew what your family did to mine." This time, his silence lasted one breath too long before the answer came. Yes. That pause hurt more than the word itself. It told her he still wanted to manage the shape of pain, even now. Eloin drew in a steady breath, but her voice did not shake. "You let me stand in front of you with open trust while you carried my history in secret. You let me love you without the whole truth." Cassian stepped closer, though still not close enough to touch her. "I was trying to fix it before I told you. I did not want pity near us. I wanted to come to you with something real, not only regret." She looked at him with a sadness that held far more force than rage. "You do not come to a woman with clean hands by hiding the dirt." The words landed between them and stayed there. He tried again, lower now. "I never made those choices. I have been undoing them. But you made this one," Eloin said. "You chose silence." That was the question now standing at the center of everything. Not whether he loved her. Not whether his guilt was sincere. Whether love still meant anything when honesty arrived late. Comment below. Does love still count when it begins with silence? Or did Cassian lose her the moment he chose not to tell the truth? Cassian looked at her as if the whole glittering night behind them had gone dark. "I love you," he said. The words were not polished. They did not sound prepared. They came from a place inside him stripped of control, stripped of strategy, stripped of every careful layer he had worn since the moment Eloin stepped back into the ballroom with that changed look in her eyes. And that was what made them hurt. Eloin did not laugh. She did not accuse him of lying. That would have been easier. A lie could be rejected cleanly. A lie could be set aside and named for what it was. But Cassian's love was real. She had felt it in the quiet after long events, in the way he remembered details no one else noticed, in the steadiness of his hand at her back, in the softness that entered his face only when he looked at her without an audience. That was why her voice, when it came, was calm and full of grief. "That is why this hurts." He closed his eyes for one brief second, as if the sentence had landed exactly where it belonged. When he looked at her again, the distance between them felt greater than the few steps of stone beneath their feet. "Eloin, please. Let me explain everything. Let me show you what I've been doing. I was going to tell you tonight." She shook her head once. "Tonight?" she repeated softly. "In the room where my father's name was framed like a memory for donors to admire. After months of looking at me with this truth in your hands." He had no answer strong enough to stand against that. The cold air moved around them. Inside, applause rose for something neither of them heard. Eloin drew herself straighter, not from pride, but from the simple need to remain whole. "I will finish this night," she said. "My team worked too hard for their labor to be stained by what you chose to hide. My name is on this room, and I will not abandon it. But when the last guest leaves, this ends." Cassian took one step forward, then stopped, because her eyes told him clearly that any closer would be a theft. "No gifts," she said. "No quiet rescue. No grand speeches sent to my door. If you want to repair anything in this life, start by speaking truth in daylight, not after love has already done the trusting for you." Then she turned, and went back inside. She finished the gala with flawless grace. When the final guest left and the room began to empty, Elowen thanked every member of her team by name. She removed her heels near the service entrance, held them in one hand, and walked into the cold night with her back straight and her dignity untouched. She chose herself, not because love meant nothing, because peace meant more. After the gala, Elowen Maris did not try to hold on to the world that had wounded her. She stepped away from it with the same quiet firmness that had carried her out through the service entrance that night. She turned down invitations that once would have felt like milestones. She passed on foundation dinners, private estate events, and polished rooms filled with people who admired beauty more easily than they respected truth. Junior noticed the shift first, not as bitterness, but as clarity. Elowen was no longer interested in being near power for the sake of being seen by it. Instead, she chose work that felt closer to the life that had shaped her. Maris House Atelier began moving in a new direction. The bookings grew smaller in scale, yet richer in feeling. Elowen designed library fundraisers where old books and candlelight turned worn spaces into places of quiet wonder. She restored warmth to family homes, hosting anniversary dinners after years of distance. She created heritage exhibits in community halls, where the names on the walls mattered more than the names on the guest list. There was less display in her work now, less effort to impress rooms trained to expect perfection, and more attention to memory, honesty, and emotional truth. Something in her art deepened. The flowers became softer, but more intentional. The tables carried fewer decorative flourishes, yet more meaning. Her lighting choices felt gentler, her materials warmer. Her designs less concerned with status and more anchored in human feeling. Clients noticed it, even when they could not fully explain it. Her rooms now seemed to hold people, instead of merely surrounding them. Elowen was not shrinking after Heartbreak. She was refining. She was clearing away everything in her life that no longer felt clean. In choosing peace over prestige, she did not become smaller. She became more herself. Cassian Rowe did not try to win Elowen back with flowers, expensive apologies, or carefully timed gestures designed to soften what had happened. For the first time in his life, he understood that private regret meant little if the harm remained hidden from everyone except the people forced to carry it. So he stopped treating repair like a personal project done in quiet corners. He brought it into the open. The first change came inside Rowe Meridian itself. Cassian ordered a full review of older redevelopment deals tied to his father's era and refused to let the company hide behind polished language any longer. He named what had happened in internal meetings with a clarity that unsettled people used to comfort. Smaller businesses had been pressured, families had been displaced, cultural heritage had been praised in public while being weakened in practice. He did not excuse it as a different time. He did not dress it up as complexity. He called it what it was, a misuse of power. Then he acted. Properties that could be restored to fairer ownership were addressed. Community groups once treated like decorative partners were brought into real decision-making. Grants were redirected toward preservation work, led by local families instead of outside prestige alone. Cassian also made a public contribution to heritage craft programs without placing his own face at the center of the announcement. He was no longer trying to look noble. He was trying to stop being dishonest. The change reached beyond business. He stopped letting Celestine shape his choices through silence and polished pressure. Invitations were refused. Public assumptions were corrected. Talia was treated with courtesy, but no longer allowed to serve as a convenient image for a life he did not want. That was when viewers, and Elowen too, could begin to see the difference between guilt and repentance. Guilt feels heavy. Repentance changes direction. Time passed before Cassian came back to Elowen, and the waiting mattered. He did not appear at her studio door the next week with a speech prepared and roses in hand. He did not send messages through mutual friends or ask Junior to soften the ground for him. He understood at last that love could not ask for quick access after truth had arrived late. So he kept his distance and let time do what apologies alone never could: test whether change was real when no reward had yet been offered. During those months, Elowen heard of him only in fragments. A board decision handled differently. A preservation grant redirected toward local craftspeople. A public correction that quietly placed dignity back where it belonged. She took note, though she never built hope around it. She had learned too much to confuse movement with transformation before it had fully settled. Their first conversation came in spring. A historic reading room on the edge of Charleston had been selected for a heritage fundraiser, modest in scale, rich in memory, and exactly the kind of event Eloan now preferred. She arrived early with Junior, carrying layout notes and linen swatches, and found Cassian already there, speaking with the director near the windows. He turned when she entered. For a brief second, the old ache returned, not because time had failed, but because real feeling does not disappear on command. He did not step toward her with ease. "Good morning," he said. That was all. No claim in his voice, no soft use of the past, only respect. Eloan answered with the same restraint. They discussed the room, the event flow, the preservation needs of the space. Their words stayed practical, yet something important lived beneath them. He listened fully. She watched carefully. The air between them carried memory, caution, and the unfamiliar steadiness of two people no longer hiding from what had happened. For the first time since the gala, being near him did not feel like betrayal of herself. It felt like truth, entering slowly. Trust did not return to Eloan and Cassian in one dramatic scene, because what had been damaged between them had never been small. It had touched memory, family, dignity, and the way love itself had first been offered. So their path back did not move through grand promises. It moved through repetition, restraint, and the difficult work of letting truth stay present in the room. They began seeing each other through shared projects. At the reading room fundraiser, Cassian did not linger after decisions were made unless Eloan extended the conversation. When she spoke, he listened without interrupting. When she disagreed, he did not manage the moment or push for softness. He answered plainly. If a detail reminded her of the gala or of her father's loss, he did not turn away from it. He stayed. That mattered more than charm ever could. Junior noticed the difference as well. "He is not trying to win," she told Eloan one evening, while packing away candle holders. "He is trying to stand still long enough for you to see whether he is real." Eloan said nothing at first, but the lines stayed with her. Over the next weeks, small things gathered meaning. Cassian arrived when he said he would. He credited local makers openly. He deferred to Eloan's judgment, without making a show of humility. He spoke of the past without polishing it. Once, during a site visit, he handed her an archival note he had found related to old district businesses and said only, "You should decide whether this belongs in the display." No pressure, no performance, only trust offered back in her direction. Still, there were moments when the old hurt returned without warning. A pause in his voice, a memory sparked by paper, stone, or old signage. Eloan did not hide those moments. Cassian did not ask her to move past them quickly. That was the real question now. Not whether love had once existed, whether love, after truth and change, could become worthy enough to be trusted again. Eloan did not choose Cassian again because time passed. She chose him again because time revealed what he did with truth, once it could no longer be delayed. He did not ask her to forget. He did not ask her to call pain romantic, because love had been real. He did not ask for credit, simply because he felt guilty. He changed the way he lived, the way he led, and the way he stood before her. Slowly, that mattered. The moment she knew came without spectacle. It was after the fundraiser in the reading room, when the last candles had been lifted, and the old tables stood bare again. Late light rested against the windows. Cassian had stayed behind to help move chairs after the staff left, not because anyone expected it, but because he no longer treated care as something performed only when watched. Eloan stood near the doorway, looking at him in that quiet room, and understood something that had taken her months to admit. She was no longer afraid of loving him, not because he had become perfect, not because the past had vanished, but because the false parts had been stripped away. What remained was humbler, slower, and more honest than the love that first began between them. This version did not ask her to trade dignity for closeness. It did not ask her to pretend silence had never done harm. It asked only whether, after truth and change, her heart still wished to open. It did. Eloin stepped toward him, not as a woman returning to what broke her, but as one choosing what had finally become worthy of her peace. Choosing herself had not destroyed love, it had purified it. If this story moved you, subscribe, like, and share it with someone who believes self-respect and love should walk together. And tell me in the comments, what line should no one ever cross in the name of love?